Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Spawn Daily. This is a collaboration between the Comic Source and Comic Boom, where this year, in 2022, we're making it the year of the Spawn. It happens to coincide with the 30th anniversary of Spawn, and we are basically going to cover an issue a day of the Spawn main series. Now, by the time we get toward the end of the year, Spawn, I think, will be somewhere around 334 or so, which will leave us about a month of days if we don't miss any, which we probably will because, life. Uh, but it does leave a little space at the end of the year. So what we'll probably do, I was thinking about this the other day, is cover some of the other Spawn adjacent stuff, or we might even intersperse that through. Because one thing we forgot to mention when we talked about the last couple of issues, issue, I guess it would have been 14 and 15, they were very much Spawn centric, or Violator centric rather, with the Violator telling this story of his epic battle against medieval Spawn. But there was an editorial note in the second issue, second part of the story in 15 that we forgot to mention, that basically said, hey, if you're curious to learn more about the Violator, because he was a very popular character when he was introduced, if you're curious, there's a series coming out, the miniseries coming out. So there was a 4-part miniseries in 1993 starring the Violator. It was called Violator. So at some point, we probably will go and cover stuff like that as well. So anyway, today's issue is brought to you by Grant Morrison. That's right. We've talked in the past about how McFarlane was able to get these really huge names, specifically Dave Sim and Alan Moore and Frank Miller and Neil Gaiman to write some issues of his series early on. Well, issue 16, we get Grant Morrison writing a 3-part story entitled Reflections. And it's awesome. Like this is fantastic. This may, and I didn't realize that Morrison even wrote any Spawn. Again, part of the reason we're doing this is so Rocky and I can educate ourselves about Spawn. I'm not the biggest Grant Morrison fan. I think previously, and it's interesting, I think All-Star Superman is probably my favorite Grant Morrison, which, typically if you're not a Morrison fan, but then when he writes your favorite character, like I've had problems. I didn't like his Action Comics run, for example, but for whatever reason, All-Star Superman just worked for me. Klaus, his sort of take on Santa Claus. I'm a big Christmas guy, as you all know. I think that's some of the better stuff he's ever done. But I think that this Spawn story may now be my favorite Grant Morrison thing I've read. What were your first impressions of this, Rocky?
Uh, well, I thought it was good. I thought it was good. I I was actually impressed with the plot development. I was really impressed, and it's it 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 does it's the one of the less psychedelic sort of Morrison. It's one of the more straightforward Grant Morrison stories, and that's a compliment. I I actually like what he adds to the lore. I'd really like to know, and we talked about this before. To what extent was there a collaboration between Morrison and Grant Morrison, Alan Moore, and Dave Sim when they came up with these storylines? Because these are major plot points to the origins of the mythology of Spawn, and it's not written by McFarlane. It's written by other writers because we're just 16 issues in here, so it's very interesting. But I really love the plot points here. I really liked how it sort of built on the explanation as to why the memories of Al Simmons were stolen, what happened to the memories, what was actually done with them, psychoplasm, Jason Wynn, who's responsible for stuff. We're gonna get into it, but it's I thought it was very well done. I really liked this. I didn't feel it was exposition heavy. I thought it was just right. It sort of flowed well. I liked it. Maybe a little bit exposition heavy in parts, but it felt like it felt like it just felt better than in previous issues in terms it read a little bit easier. It flowed better, and it was very informative, and it added a very interesting character by the end of the issue.
Yeah, I agree. The flow of this, the pacing of it within the issue itself is fantastic, and yeah, I think you're right. it's less crazy and psychedelic and more straightforward for Morrison. But again, we've talked about this with the previous writers that have joined McFarlane. There's not a lot of lore to pull from, right? Like that part of that is Morrison can't help himself. He's such a huge fan of the history of comics and Golden Age and especially DC that when he writes DC stuff, sometimes he's a little too smart for the readers because he's referencing stuff that only Grant Morrison remembers, right, from Golden Age and Silver Age and what have you. He doesn't have that luxury here. There is not a lot of lore to pull from, but he does go back and reference things, from the previous 15 issues, which works well because again, it's all sort of recent in our minds. Now, as much as I love what Morrison did here, I think it's probably safe to say that the more uh, impactful or more important change in creators here is that we get a different artist. For the first time, it's somebody other than Todd McFarlane drawing Spawn. And I also saw recently that somebody was asking about the longest runs on comics for a single creator uninterrupted, and somebody mentioned Spawn. Oh, Todd's been doing it at 300 issues. No, he hasn't. No, he's been involved. Don't get me wrong. He's overseen it, but right here, right from the beginning, issue 16, you already have an issue where Todd McFarlane is not listed in the credits of the issue. So I find that to be interesting as well, and that happens throughout. There are, and Rocky's alluded to it before, where McFarlane himself says, "Hey, there are other people who draw Spawn better than me and write it better than me." So who we have on Spawn for the first time handling the penciling duties is Greg Capullo, and this is really the title that really put his name on the map and raised him up to that superstardom that he still enjoys today. That being said, I don't know that you look at this art, or I look at this art and think, hey, that's Greg Capullo art. I don't know that it's recognizable as Capullo art, at least for me. What did you think, Rocky?
Uh, I had a second glance at it too. I thought it was really good. I could have been fooled that it was McFarlane's art at times. And I even saw like even remnants of a little bit of Jim Lee there. So if I'm honest, but no, you could have fooled me. And if you'd have told me it was McFarlane, I'd have believed it. I thought it was. I think maybe Greg Capullo at the time maybe he was channeling his inner Todd McFarlane, which would be completely understandable, because this is of course was a top selling title at the time. So I really liked the art. I thought it was very good. I like I said it served the narrative well, and it felt very consistent. Maybe a little bit better, but I'd have to be nitpicking. Overall, I thought it was good. I will actually say this: Greg Capullo is better at the backgrounds. He's got better backgrounds. McFarlane gets lazy with his backgrounds in some of the early issues that he drew. Well, there's a couple here. Maybe some backgrounds could have filled in more, but I mean, so maybe you know, uh, I liked it. I liked it. And maybe it wasn't that different, but it did seem to have there's a lot of kinetic energy. There was some good action here. There's a couple of scenes I felt were maybe forced in order to add some action. But you know, this was a really good issue. And Greg Capullo here, when you consider how significant this issue is in terms of its revelation, and the art serves it very well. It's got blood, it's got gore, it's got violence, it's got everything that the previous issues had. And I'm sure the average person would not be able to tell the significant difference between Capullo and McFarlane, but maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. He definitely has been influenced by McFarlane, and it's interesting. So because I saw this art and knew it was Capullo, and the other thing, this is definitely speaks to how much I enjoyed the issue that Morrison did here. I, typically I read one, maybe two issues of Spawn. I had to read this whole story. Like as soon as I read this part, I had to go and read 17. And as soon as I read 17, that wasn't the end of the story. I had to go and read 18. I couldn't wait another day. I knew I had them. I wanted to finish the story. But the other thing path that led me down was the fact that I was looking at this Capullo art. Now, my first experience with Greg Capullo art was on Quasar. And I've talked to Greg about it or mentioned it to Greg before. And he's not a fan of what his art looked like in the beginning when he was on Quasar. So that led me to go look at his earliest art that he did for Marvel, which he does a couple of issues of What If. He does an issue of an annual of Fantastic Four. He's on an issue of Avengers Spotlight. And when you go and look at that art compared to what his art looks like now, it doesn't look anything like it. But also comparing that art to this, it doesn't look anything like it. So then I went and looked at his Marvel art, the title he was on right before he moved on to Spawn, which was X-Force, and it's much more similar to this. So I say that to say that Greg his art has definitely evolved over time, and I'd love to have him on to talk about it at some point. I'm sure we'll probably make that happen. Um, but regardless of whatever influence, whether it was McFarlane or just kind of the '90s art style that everybody was sort of drawing with more detail and more dynamic poses and whatnot that influences art. I can't say for sure. All I know is, like Rocky said, this art's fantastic. It's similar enough to McFarlane that I didn't notice right away, but it wasn't too long before I noticed. And I flipped back and I went, oh, this is Capullo's first issue. I didn't realize he started this early. The biggest difference between the McFarlane art and the Capullo art is there's more of a realism to Capullo's art. We know at various times that McFarlane will exaggerate anatomy for effect, and he does it very, very well. Not to the point of taking it over to Liefeld places where somebody's bicep is bigger than their head. Mm-hmm. But McFarlane does play a little more fast and loose with anatomy than Capullo does, at least here at this point in Capullo's career. So, yeah, I mean, the art is absolutely fantastic. One of the differences also between Capullo and McFarlane. McFarlane inks himself on all those early issues. Here we have Dan Panosian and Art Taber as inkers. But yeah, I think the art works fantastically. Really good use of shadow and shading and whatnot. So in terms of the story itself, it starts off and we're in what looks like sort of this idyllic hometown, and the voiceover is telling us they call it Simmonsville, as in Al Simmons. And basically what we learn is that when the deal was made to have Al Simmons killed. So again, this is new information, right? Like we thought it was just Jason Wynn decided that Al Simmons was to be killed and they just killed him. Well, turns out maybe there's a little more to it than that. And at this army base, this atomic bomb testing site in Nevada, while testing an atom bomb, they opened a hole into another dimension. That dimension they call hell, and they discovered a substance they call psychoplasm. And apparently psychoplasm is this kind of a known substance, and it changes in response to the mental state of the people that are perceiving it. So everything in this town that we're shown at the beginning they're all memories of Al Simmons, right? That when we sent Simmons to hell, we stole his memories, and those memories acted upon the raw psychoplasm, and it created Simmonsville, a fake town built from the jumble of one man's recollections. The houses he lived in, the schools he went to, the playgrounds he played in, factories, churches, blah, blah, blah. And so they're using it as sort of this testing ground to see if they can, in some way, weaponize this psychoplasm. So as we're given this exposition, we see these two soldiers get torn apart by what look to be brothers or some sort of relatives of the Violator and the Vindicator. They look similar with the teeth and the skinny body and big head and whatnot. But as it pulls back, apparently all this is being monitored via video by Jason Wynn and somebody named General Hale, or Major Vale. And it talks about how they're trying to figure out how to weaponize this. And Major Vale's like, I don't know how I take this to the board, and I barely can believe what I saw with my own eyes. And Jason Wynn says, well, I know it's a little overwhelming. Think it over. We'll talk again in a little bit. I need to go work out. So meanwhile, we move over to Spawn. He's thinking about who he is. Is he really human still? He made a deal with the devil. Again, little exposition here, and his voice, the tone, how he talks sounds a little different. Again, it's a different writer. It's Morrison and not McFarlane. So we get a little bit of exposition for anybody who's jumping on for the first time, maybe a Grant Morrison fan who hadn't been reading it up to this point. Talks about Chapel's the one that killed him. Al Simmons is dead, but who set him up? Who sent him to hell? And if he's dead, how can he have a body? Is he still human? What what got buried in Al Simmons' grave. So he decides maybe not the wisest choice to go and find out. On his way there, he sees one of his buddies, one of his homeless friends, in the alley about to be attacked by some, I don't even know what to call them, scumbags, I guess, that they're going to solve the homeless problem by lighting him on fire. Burn a bum, they call it.
Yeah.
So it's basically an excuse for Morrison to write some cool action scenes with Spawn as he takes these guys out.
Wasn't that part of pop culture back in the 90s too? Wasn't there a phase where they were burning homeless people, I
Yeah,
recall? I think this, because I think I'm actually surprised more. Maybe I shouldn't be surprised, but I actually thought this whole scene was forced. Like it was like they needed to transition Spawn and to do something, and again, making it very obvious. Oh my God, we have these really, really bad guys that are going to burn people in that. Like just absolutely over the top, like, it's not. I mean, this is a comic book about the devil, for God's sakes, and deals made with the devil, and the human, the human villains are just as cruel as Melbrossia himself. It's just incredible.
yeah, I think you're right, and that probably is a reference to that. There was a time when, as horrific as it is, where homeless were being burned, being attacked. So maybe that's where Morrison pulled it from. But as the story continues, we see that not far away in Midtown Manhattan, there's a mirror-walled building with no name and no number, which may be even in a story with Malbolgia, this you know supernatural version of Satan or the devil, and Al Simmons brought back to life with all these powers. Maybe the most unbelievable thing of all is the fact that there would be a building in Midtown Manhattan that didn't have a name or a number. That just doesn't happen. What are you talking about? No name, no number. But either way,
Yeah.
it's the headquarters of heaven's foothold on earth. And we are told by Gabrielle and Michaela that the recent Hellspawn who defeated Angela is special and dangerous, and they've been empowered by the powers of heaven to destroy the creature. The balance of power must be seriously compromised if control, apparently that's what heaven's boardroom or powers that be are referred to, if control is prepared to intervene so directly into the affairs of the earthly plane. So we are then shown a satellite that's orbiting Earth, where apparently the powers of heaven create their weapons. And there's a couple of, I assume, what are supposed to be angels. They don't have complete skulls. Seems to be this glow around them, almost like a halo type effect. And they talk about how it's not just anybody that they can use, anybody's body that they can hollow out and use to implant the power of heaven or their own essences. And so there is a subject that is ready though, and it says I'm bringing him up now. And in maybe the coincidence of all coincidences, the scene then shifts to Jason Wynn, who, for a boardroom guy, for a business guy who sits around his butt, tries to keep himself in pretty good shape. He's fighting against some ninjas. After all, it is the 90s, right? So what are you going to fight when you're training but ninjas? Got a little bit of a gut on him, but he's got some musculature, and he seems to do pretty well against these ninjas. But when the angels pull up the body that's been prepped, or they feel has the ability to contain this heavenly power, it is Jason Wynn himself. And he's like, how did I get here? Who are you people? Answer me, damn you. Are you his people? And they answer, we do not serve Malbolgia, servants of a higher power, as will you be when our work is done. And they start to imbue him with the power, and he yells out, it's burning, God help me, it's burning. Um, so before we can see the final fate of Jason Wynn, we see that Spawn has arrived at the grave of Al Simmons. Again, this is just a bad idea. I'm not sure what good he thinks can come from this. I guess if it's empty, he can just think, well, at least I'm in my own body. But I don't know. It just seems to me like let sleeping dogs lie. And sure enough, he opens it up. There's his corpse. He complains about the smell, and he's like, man, if this is my body here, if this is what's left of Al Simmons, then what am I? God help me. What am I? What have you done to me? So meanwhile, the scene shifts back to the satellite. We see Jason Wynn now all powered up, glowing with this golden light, much more traditionally super heroic physique. He's got the abs now. He's got that V shape with the giant trapezius and wide shoulders. And the angels are talking about how you're one creature. We've made you strong. You can go and destroy the hellspawn. The elemental fire of heaven burns in you. You're no longer human. Rise up, be born again, soldier of the light. And as the light fades away, we see him there in his costume, which is a little bit similar to Spawn in terms of a big giant cape and some spikes and some chains. Obviously, the coloring is different, and he has a full helm. And they refer to him as anti-Spawn, so anti-Hellspawn, I suppose. Big purple cape, and a really interesting choice. Like, of all people, I mean, it's sort of like, from what I can gather and kind of the impression I get so far, the powers of hell aren't 100% evil. The powers of heaven aren't 100% good. There's good and bad aspects to either one of them, much like you can talk about any complex hero or villain in that way. But a really interesting choice, very coincidental as well. Really, of all the bodies on Earth that you're going to empower with the power of heaven, it just happens to be the one that ordered Al Simmons to be killed.
Yeah.
And you're going to make Jason Wynn, who so far has come across as this really not nice guy, really selfish and in a lot of ways evil. You're going to make him the power for good. So, but it's a minor nitpick. Overall, I like the pacing. I like the inherent conflict that creates. Like, what the hell's going to happen when Spawn is fighting anti-Spawn and realizes this is Jason Wynn? He's going to be fired up to defeat him all the more. So yeah, interesting choices, and it goes back to something that we've mentioned a lot in the early issues that have been written by other creators, and Rocky mentioned already earlier. How much did McFarlane approve that? Hey, Grant Morrison's like, hey Todd, I'm going to make anti-Spawn Jason Wynn, right, and really solidify this sort of antagonistic relationship between the two, or did Morrison just like, I'm going to do whatever I want? Really curious to know how that all played out. What are your thoughts, Rocky?
Well, it's interesting. It is a very curious choice that Jason Wynn, the evil guy who's responsible, Jason Wynn made a deal with some presence in the afterlife, in hell, which we assume it's Malbolgia, that Jason Wynn made a deal with, saying, look, I'll give you Al Simmons if you give me psychoplasm. That was the deal in exchange. And so they get Malbolgia gets Al Simmons, which is, I'm assuming he's a good fighter. And then in return, they get psychoplasm, and they mix the psychoplasm with Al Simmons' memories, and you got Simmonsville there. But then, and it's interesting, remember what Malbolgia said to Al Simmons. He basically said, Al Simmons, you're an atheist. You're going to be an agent. Now, not only is there a God, you're an atheist, Al Simmons, but not only can I tell you is there a God, but now you're the enemy of God. And what I find interesting about this juxtaposition, that now with Jason Wynn being evil, I don't know if Jason Wynn, I assume Jason Wynn is also an atheist. Jason Wynn is now the enemy of the devil, the very devil that he made the deal with, because I'm assuming this control is sort of like the opposite of hell. And so now Jason Wynn, who made a deal with the devil, is now, in theory, the enemy of the devil and the enemy of the army of Malbolgia. And Jason Wynn is now fighting alongside, is basically an agent of God. Now, really, at least that's how I'm seeing this. It's very, very odd. I don't understand why the devil would want to recruit soldiers that have a high moral compass, a strong moral fiber, and then why would heaven or control want to recruit someone with no moral compass like Jason Wynn? It just seems like a really odd choice, and I don't think at this point of the narrative, maybe this will be explained, but I don't really understand this here. It actually seems like a really, I mean, it's interesting,
it's backwards.
But it's backwards, and it's also a little bit it kind of goes against any kind of mythology. It doesn't make any sense to me. It doesn't make any sense to me at this point in the story why they would do that. I mean, there's plenty of great soldiers out there that you could consider them soldiers of Christ or soldiers of heaven. You don't need to go and pick somebody who's evil to fight in heaven. And you don't have to, you know what I mean? Like it doesn't, there's plenty of people to choose from on earth. And this really seemed forced. And I'm surprised that Morrison would do something this almost cliche, to be honest. Like I'm surprised. I'm surprised. I'm really curious. I've not read the next issue, so I don't know where this goes, but this seems like really odd to me. And even with the costume looking oddly, it's a very, although it does have he does this anti-spawn when he does looks to have a cross on the front, which I think is good, and even red crosses on each forearm, or the symbol of red crosses, and also on his below the knee. So I guess that's interesting. It's but again, like I said, strange choice. That's the only thing that sort of threw me off this issue, and yeah, but I love the idea of Al Simmons' memories mixing with the psychoplasm and creating the Simonsville, and how, I mean, really Jason Wynn, really, I mean, it was all Jason Wynn making a deal with the devil, and it was the underground nuclear testing that led to the discovery of a literal hell. I mean, it's fun. It's a straightforward story, a straightforward story, and it is fun. But boy, it seems. I hope it seems really, really convenient here, overly convenient and a little bit forced. But we'll see where it takes us.
Yeah, I mean, is it enough of a reason to say, well, why would you put the morally ambiguous guy or the morally corrupt guy on the side of heaven and the morally upright guy on the side of hell? Is it enough to say, well, because 90s? I mean, it's a very 90s thing to do. So, there's that to consider as well. Part of me thinks that another interesting dynamic would have been to go with Terry Fitzgerald as the choice for anti-spawn.
Yeah,
You're
that would
setting
make a
up
lot more sense. He's got the
yeah,
moral fiber for it anyway.
right, and you're setting up an adversarial relationship between Al Simmons and his best friend,
Yeah,
of which there's an undercurrent that there's a little bit of Al Simmons that's got to resent the fact that Terry is still human. Terry, well, or was at that point. He wouldn't be when he became anti-spawn, obviously. But there's a part of Al Simmons that when he discovers Terry married his wife, Terry's still human. Terry is living the life that Al Simmons wished he was still living, including being able to give Wanda a child, something Al Simmons was never able to do. So, but the choice was made, whether it was Grant Morrison, whether it was Todd McFarlane. Hopefully, we'll discover at some point. But more to come tomorrow on Spawn Daily. So we hope you are all enjoying it. Be sure to reach out on social media and give us your thoughts. And also be sure, if you're listening to us on the audio only, that you head over to the YouTube channel. Do a search for Comic Space Boom ! That's Rocky's channel. Subscribe, like this video, ring that notification bell so you know when new content comes out beyond Spawn Daily, because we do a lot of other stuff. Rocky's got some recent content, some year-end wrap-up stuff on there as well. And of course, we'll have the Comic Source Awards episodes coming up pretty soon before the end of the month. Conversely, if you're checking us out on YouTube and you haven't subscribed to the audio only, just go to your favorite podcast app on your smart device or podcast platform, Spotify, Google Play, Stitcher. We're on all of them. Just do a search for the Comic Source and subscribe so you don't miss out on any of the audio only content. So that's going to do it for this episode. We'll be back tomorrow with more Spawn Daily, as well as our DC Spotlight is out today, as it is on every Tuesday. Be warned, there are spoilers. And then tomorrow we'll have our spoiler-free New Comics Wednesday episode. So thanks for joining us as always, everybody, and we'll talk to you next time.
see you later.